Hello, good evening. Sorry, I was expecting to see some more faces and I forget this is a webinar, not a Zoom meeting. So thank you and good evening all. I know we'll have a few more members joining us, but we will start because we know time is short and this is undoubtedly going to be quite a interesting and exciting session, at least for Andy and I know. So to briefly introduce myself, my name is Renuka Soni. I am the chair of the IOSH London Met branch and I have my very lovely colleague Andy.
Hi Renuka, how you doing? I'm Andy McNair and the chair for the IOSH North East of Scotland. How you doing?
Good, thank you. We're not, I know Andy did this last time, we're not going to call out individual branch members because it's unfair. We love you all equally, particularly at the moment because there are no barriers and no boundaries, and it doesn't matter what Boris Johnson says, we do love Scotland. But one person none of us are surprised to see today, and I have to give him a shout out, is Craig. We did all put a little wager on the fact that you would be joining us, Craig, so it's good to see you on today's webinar. Hello and welcome.
It's a shame he's not on actually, Renuka. He could have done a shoey for us.
He could have done a shoey. I'm sure Stuart's probably glad that he's not going to be taking over a presidency from Craig, otherwise that would have been rather smelly. Without further ado, because we're not here to hear from me, you're not here to listen to me, you are here to listen to Stuart Hughes and Rick Bate. I am going to hand you over, switch myself off. If you have any questions, please do put them on our Q&A. I should also add, for those of you that haven't spotted it, we are recording this session, and that's to ensure that our members can enjoy it if they haven't attended it today, or for you to be able to share with colleagues who will hopefully find it equally as interesting and useful. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Renuka, thank you very much. Andy, thank you for inviting us. I was asked a little while ago, after doing a recent IOSH webinar for the future leaders, if I'd come back and have a chat about safety in Formula One. And we're quite a humble team at Mercedes, and one of the things we kind of pride ourselves on is not running around and shouting about how good we may have been in the past, and we kind of focus on the future. And I really wanted to bring a different perspective to this talk. So rather than just talking about Formula One, I wanted to talk to my good friend Rick Bate at Formula E as well. He's got a very different perspective on some of the challenges around creating, hosting, delivering events, and we thought that we could have a really interesting chat. We'll kick about a few ideas and a few questions amongst ourselves, and then we're going to hand this over to the audience. So really want this to be high participation. The more questions that go into the Q&A box, the more benefit you'll get out from Rick and I. Rick and I could sit here and talk to you for hours and hours and hours, and I can always talk to Rick. It's a pleasure, and it's an honour to share this time with him. So that's a bit about the format. A little bit about me. So my name's Stuart Hughes. I'm Head of Health and Safety at Mercedes Formula One. I've been with the team for coming up to 5 years now, and I won't lie, it's my favourite job I've ever had. And the reason for that is I love being part of the team. My history, I've been an environmental health officer, worked in operations across municipal waste contracts, and then also consulting for Big Four KPMG in health and safety. So I'm a lifelong health and safety person. I've been doing it for about 15 years now, and it's a real privilege, like I say, to talk to IOSH members and give you a bit of insight into safety in motorsport. I'll hand over to you, Rick, for your introduction, and then we'll kick off with some of our questions.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm a little bit intimidated in the presence of greatness in our Formula One cousins. I always look across to you guys and think, yeah, grass is always greener. Little bit about myself. I've been involved in health and safety for 20 years, pretty much full-time for the past 15 years, but prior to that, the first part of my career was in the emergency services. I was a paramedic. Spent a fair bit of time on the air ambulances in North Wales, and for various reasons, I kind of gravitated away from that. I got an opportunity to go back to school. I did a BSc in occupational health and safety. Discovered I really liked education. It's amazing what you find out in latter life. I then did a PG dip in Derby Uni, and that kind of, paralleled with a kind of life that my wife refers to as me being somewhat of a nomad. I've got a kind of a different background to Stuart. In the early part of my health and safety career, I always lent into my paramedic knowledge, because that helped me to open some doors in the early days. But I have literally wandered the world for the past 20 years. I've done 3 Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games. I've done a lot of rock and roll tours. Worked with Red Bull, worked with Monster Energy. But I think the thing that most people ask me about is my time working on Top Gear Live, which again wasn't as much fun as people might think. It was a tough gig. It actually turned my hair grey. Yes, no surprise. It's very, very grey now, as you can see. I joined Formula E part-time right at the start. I did some street events with them, helping them launch the brand. I didn't hear anything off them for about 3 years, and then 4.5 years ago, got a phone call, asked me could I get on a plane, fly to Mexico to help them out at an event, and that is pretty much, that was my interview. I lead up a team of 17 part-time and full-time health and safety professionals, and I've got a pretty much of a real broad remit across the whole company. I lean into the into corporate health and safety. I support the legal department, procurement, estates management, event planning, and actually the bit that's kind of different between Stuart and myself, I actually, it's actually my team that build the tracks, and then Stuart and his gang come along and mess it all up for us. So yeah, that's kind of me, and yeah, my relationship with Stuart. I'm the gamekeeper. Yeah, he's the poacher.
I'm not sure that's entirely true. I can't see you saying that the grass is greener over in F1 coming from the most sustainable racing sport that there is currently on the planet, Rick. I think that's maybe the grass is a bit of a darker brown over on our side, possibly. But I think one of the things I'm excited about is some of the developments in motorsport. Formula E being one of them, and then Extreme E coming as well. And I think sustainability is a big push right through from Formula One through to FE, and the great work that you're doing there. I think the people that are viewing this will be super interested to try and understand how did you get into Formula E other than just turning up to help them out a little bit? What was there something that really drew you to that series, or was it as simple as somebody asked you to come and help?
It literally was that simple. I didn't know what Formula E was when I got the first phone call. In fact, the very first job I did for Formula E was to apply for a permit to close London Bridge to allow them to do some filming. Hand on heart, and I know I've got some colleagues from Formula E listening in to this. I didn't really know if Formula E had legs back in 2013. Shows how wrong you can be. I didn't understand the technology. I probably was the wrong demographic. I've been passionate about motorsport literally since I was a kid. I've had a competition license. I hate to say this, but it's true, for 40 years. And I've either officiated or competed on some quite amazing events around the world over the years. I've done Peking Paris, Panama Alaska, Shield of Africa. I mean, it's a 40-year story. I'm not going to go through all of the stuff I've done, but I am, I do feel quite humbled by, I do feel it's luck. I have made an effort to be as useful as I possibly can be, but I think one of the key things for me is, how did I get to where I am now? I genuinely believe it's volunteering. I volunteered, I was, and still do. I go and stand on the bank at Alton Park with an orange suit on. I'm very much, and I want to be very much in touch with the grassroots of motorsport. I've worked with BSB, with British touring cars, and during my my re-education back in my late 30s, early 40s, I worked for Motorsport Vision, and I'm extremely grateful to to you know, the people from Motorsport Vision for giving me a part-time job while I studied. So yeah, how did I get into motorsport? Hand on heart, it was luck. Right place, right time.
I think there's always a bit of luck, and I don't want to embarrass you here, Rick, but your motorsport license is older than I am, so I don't know how you feel about that. I think for me, in getting into motorsport, again, very fortunate, right place, right time. I was sat in an office in London at KPMG writing a report on about day 3 in iteration 50, if I'm honest, and I wasn't having the most amount of fun. And I went to Google something. I was researching, and a jobs website came up. Hadn't been on it for a while. That led to the job advert for a health and safety advisor for Mercedes F1, and my day stopped there. Basically, that was instant cover letter application, and thankfully, 5 years ago I did enough. 5 and a bit years ago now, I did enough to start the day job here. One of the things, obviously, but you've had a very interesting and varied career, and you've done a lot of things before you transitioned into this kind of second or maybe even third career as in safety. What are the skills that you've brought along from those that are really applicable in the world of motor racing?
I thought you were going to ask this, so I've got half an idea how I'm going to answer this, but I think my first big break came about through being asked to undertake a dual role with the BBC on Top Gear Live. For a while, I had my paramedic license, and I was transitioning into health and safety. That was my initial break. That was the point where I realized, I can move away from being a paramedic. I can probably find a really, a successful career in health and safety. Then when I realized there was the potential to utilize all of my skills and maybe open that door to that dream job of working in motorsport full time, I wasn't just stepping through that door, I was running towards it. What I think makes me useful, and that, where perhaps there is a huge overlap in our skill sets, Stuart, but there are some areas in your world which I absolutely, have very little knowledge of. But the thing that I think that brought me across into Formula E is because we are so different to you guys in Formula One. We don't race on established tracks. We build our own tracks. And it was my knowledge of, delivering events, whether that was an Olympic Games or a Commonwealth Games, a rock concert, building a stage. A lot of the sort of the pure event safety skills are really, helped my career in Formula E. My knowledge of temporary structures, planning, permitting. How do you go about starting with a blank sheet of paper, then 2 years down the line delivering a race in Sanya in China, having gone through the legal process of the permitting and submitting all the documents you require, and then understanding how an event control room runs. That was again a skill that I brought with me from the emergency services. I knew how an event ops room worked, and I know I've said this 3 times now. There was an element of luck. It just happened to be the kind of esoteric skills that I had with a broad knowledge of motorsport opened the door. And before Formula E, my knowledge of track motorsport was really, really limited. My background is very clearly in rallying. Both as a hobbyist competitor and an official. And really, you may think this is an odd thing to say, but understanding crowd flows, understanding how people behave and how people will react, really, from a rallying background, actually was another skill that actually helped me. So, bit of luck, right skills, once in my life. Right, I was in the right place, and I was free at the right time. If I hadn't answered that phone call from our chief operations officer back 4.5 years ago, I wouldn't have got on that plane to Mexico, and I wouldn't be where I am now. It's really simple.
And I think it's really interesting to see that transition of skills across the different elements. And I know that we have conversations around some of the different risk profiles of the operations that you obviously put on in Formula E and the places that we visit in Formula One. I think the things that I think in the Formula One world, you know, I can't sit here and say we're any particularly different to a manufacturing environment. You know, we are a small to medium-sized manufacturing company in the middle of the UK. We might have some fancier kit, we might have some, you know, trick technology, but fundamentally we've got about 1,000 people working on designing and building, you know, a couple of motor cars. And the fact that, you know, if you think of a normal kind of production line, the Ford Fiesta rolls off at the start of its new model. 5 years later, they refresh that model. That refreshment and upgrade equivalent we do in about 9 months. And we can take something from somebody's idea to design, to testing, to built, to safety checked, to out on the car in about 21 days. So that just gives you an idea of the pace of the innovation in Formula One. But fundamentally, we still have people, you know, in working environments, working with hazardous chemicals. We have people generating carbon fiber dust from the manufacturing process. We have a wonderful testing and development department that really push the boundaries, and I'm sure they just try and break absolutely everything. And it's all, I think the key thing that I've learned here is about saying yes. It's how safety can contribute to enabling the work to happen. And I think one of the key skills is not being afraid of, you know, the intellect that we have here and some of the kind of real pushing of the envelope that happens. And we try and understand to, you know, as much as possible, you know, why are we trying to do this? What's the benefit to the organisation? And then how can we do it, you know, and weigh up the risks effectively? And I think it's, you know, it's very simple application of the core principles of safety that goes into the day-to-day operations within a Formula One team. Yes, there's some complications. We travel around the world. You know, it's a 24/7 operation, and there's about 2.5 weeks off a year. So it is full on. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything that you can't transfer from learning about the application of safety from a construction site, from logistics world, etc. You know, the core knowledge of safety, I think, is transferable into motorsport. Rick, I'm really interested to understand, first of all, what's your favourite thing about your job? And then after that, what's the biggest challenge?
Interesting. Well, I'm so glad that you didn't ask the COVID question, which I thought you might go there. For everyone that's listening, I know COVID has taken over most of our lives. It's proved extremely challenging for Stuart and myself currently. Maybe someone will ask that question later on. What do I love about my job? Well, you know, who doesn't like traveling? I think one of the interesting things about our two championships, Stuart, you guys, you're the established championship, and I think sometimes Formula E looks to do things slightly differently. We've got a very different demographic to you guys. Our demographic peaks out in early 30s. That's where our marketing teams. That's the demographic our marketing teams are targeting. Yeah, I do. I really like something which you might find this is really, really boring. I actually love getting into the nitty-gritty of event planning, working with local authorities in different parts of the world, building up friendships and relationships around the world, and taking the event through to the point where we actually get a permit which allows us to go race at 2 o'clock on a Saturday. There are always, really, really challenging and complex issues, which, again, you're absolutely right. I approach them absolutely no differently to you. Sometimes I'll admit I struggle in countries that don't necessarily have an established health and safety system. They don't have some countries we go to don't even have any regulation or guidance. I think a good little one of, sort of an anecdotal tale about, what do I love. When we first started to race on the streets of Brooklyn 3 years ago, we had some serious challenges with the fire department, and I made it my mission to win these guys over. They didn't understand a Brit, and they certainly didn't understand my sense of humour. And we got through that. And 4 years down the line, one of the first things I do whenever I arrive in Brooklyn is I go to the local firehouse and say hello. I've learned so much about fire safety, particularly in fire safety in New York, and the archaic system that I thought they used, and it transpires I was quite wrong. And that to me is where I get my satisfaction. I'm obviously quite a bit older than you. It's about, that's what I enjoy. I enjoy the challenge of taking something that doesn't exist and delivering something that, not compared to Formula One, we're not quite there yet, but it's still, it's an exciting place to be, and the product is improving, season on season. That's the good bit. The challenges, the traveling is actually, I'm going to contradict myself now. When you're traveling for 9 months of the year and you're rarely home, that actually can become one of the positives can actually become a challenge in itself. I alluded to working in countries that don't have established health and safety management systems. They quite often we'll go to countries where on paper they have regulation, they have guidance, but they don't actually have any understanding of how they can actually deliver that. I then, and my team of 17, we're trying to deliver an event with an ecosystem that sometimes can be 4,500 people that have traveled around the world to come to our event, and trying to keep those people as safe as possible within an event bubble. I know COVID bubbles are quite common to us now, but I've kind of adopted a process of keeping all of our ecosystem in a bubble for the past 4.5 years. I also find it's a bit of a challenge, and God bless Barbara. Without Barbara, I would not be able to keep on top of the different regulations in the countries that we visit. I have a health and safety consultant that will work with us at every race from in country, but I'm one of those people that I like to know, I like to have a decent knowledge of the health and safety regulations in each country we go to. Other challenges for me, again, it's a sad fact of life. We all get older. Trying to keep in touch with the technology, particularly the technology in the cars. While I don't have a huge amount of responsibility for the cars when they're racing, pretty much any point up to the time where the cars actually go on track, they're actually under my remit. And understanding that the changes in the technology, everyone knows that until 2 years ago, our cars wouldn't run a full race, and the drivers had to come in and do a kind of a fake pit stop and change cars. The technology change driven by our Formula One colleagues is very it's very difficult to keep on top of. And the other thing is that there is I have an awful lot of very, very bright, clever young professionals nipping at my heels, and there's positives and negatives in that. The positives are that I can feed off these people, and hopefully that they may learn something from the grey-haired old bloke that at some point probably even mentored them. And I guess also the positive could be that from me, particularly in Formula E, there's some very, very talented young people. Only a few years behind me that gives me a reassurance that I know that when I decide to move on, probably to retire, I know that I'll be leaving Formula E in very, very good hands.
And I think that's the mark of not only doing a great job but being a great IOSH professional is also the giving back into the IOSH community. And I know you do a great deal of that, Rick, and I'm grateful for it. And I know when we met four years ago, I got a lot out of our initial conversations, and we still have them regularly. My favourite bit about the job, hopefully somebody in the background is going to tee up a video shortly. I work with an incredible group of people, and one of the early kind of pieces of advice I was given was, how can I align, you know, the language that already exists in a motorsport team to the world of safety? And very unprompted, our leadership often say things live on TV. Sometimes you wince, and other times you kind of high five yourself and think this has really landed really well. There's a clip coming up hopefully on See It, Say It, Fix It, and that's our it was used for reliability to encourage people to speak up about problems that they were seeing either in the design process or in inspection for kind of QA on parts. We hijacked it in safety and we've put it into our safety observation world, and it's a very powerful element and really improves our psychological safety at work. So hopefully that video can play and we can take a quick look at that.
You know, we quite often discuss what you guys have done and you know, what the drivers have done, but some of those guys in the pit wall yesterday, I noticed you went up and down, Andrew Shufflin, your leadership group, if you like, how much have they taken ownership for their decisions? I think back to James coming over the radio in Austria and apologising, but it seems there's an honesty, there's an integrity within your leadership group that has really driven the team forward this year. Is that the case?
Yes, we try to achieve that since a while, to provide a safe place. You are allowed to make mistakes and also to call them out. We have a motto that is see it, say it, fix it. And that needs the environment that you're not scared for your job or for your role. And the Monday morning briefing after the race is always, everybody starts with the shortcomings and the mistakes they did on the weekend. And this is why James is flying the airplane in the race. He's making the strategy calls. I'm distracting him a little bit. But at the end, he takes ownership when he's right and he takes ownership when he's wrong.
Perfect. And we're able to leverage that leadership and really reinforce the values and the words that are said on the telly back into the factory to say, look, this is right from the very top of the organisation that are brought into speaking up. And that applies to whether you've made a bad call in a race or to whether there's an issue, you know, within one of the operational environments. And people are really empowered not only to speak up about the issues, but to put the fixes in place. And that's another great thing that I'm very fortunate about, that people take proactive action within our environment. That is my favourite thing about the job, is the calibre of the people that I work with and the true team spirit that I'm fortunate enough to be part of. The biggest challenge I have in my role is everybody has an impetus to do their absolute best and go, you know, above and beyond. And sometimes we have to push back on that slightly, because people can, in their quest to put things right or to try and eke out an extra bit of performance, put themselves in harm's way without meaning to, and that can be quite a challenge when you're dealing with that kind of proactive mentality. So there are some kind of fairly obvious challenges, I think, in a race environment, like standing in front of a car that's coming down a pit lane at 60 miles an hour with just a front jack in front of you. And if you watched the race a couple of weekends ago, the Port Forks India chap felt the full effects of cold brakes from Lance Stroll. That is a risk that is part of motor racing, and you know, and unfortunately we do have times where people pick up injuries, and our main goal is to make sure that we do everything we can to try and prevent that. There's an incredible amount of practice that goes on to make sure that those pit stops are, you know, 2.5 seconds in duration. And I think somebody's asked a question about it, so when we get to that question, I've got a little video of pit stops to show you, and you can get a really good view of what it's like to be in the heat of battle. Rick, just before we kind of pass over to the Q&A section, which I've seen is lit up, so thank you very much everybody that's contributing there. There's two bits I'd like to do. I think before we go to questions, we will play your video, but before we do that, I just wonder what piece of advice you'd give to an IOSH professional looking to get into the world of motorsport.
Oh, I kind of half predicted you were going to ask me that. There are no barriers, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say volunteering again. If I hadn't volunteered through you know what used to be the MSA, or even in the earlier days the RAC MSA, and Motorsport UK, I wouldn't have got to know people. I wouldn't have got those first few breaks that opened doors for me. I wouldn't have built a network. You know, there is another gentleman that plays a key role in my luck in finding myself where I am now. I knew of one of Spain's rallying greats, a guy called Manolo Ortiz Tallo, and over the years I'd got to know Manolo. When I went over to Mexico 4.5 years ago to help Formula E out, surprise, surprise, Manolo is one of the directors at Formula E. I wasn't aware of that. Now, Manolo was aware of my competing at a low level. Manolo was aware of me being a senior international official with the FIA. Manolo had obviously at some point had probably seen me, standing on the side of a forest, counting down into a stage. I kind of guess I did some hard yards earlier on, and that's how probably I initially broke the barrier. But I wouldn't want anyone out there to think that there's a prescribed route. I've said to anyone who's prepared to listen, and my mentees that I'm really, really proud to work with through IOSH. I invite my mentees to come to races. Some have, some haven't. And I guess it's also about a little bit of finding your way in the world, and it's easier when you're older. Your confidence grows. 20-30 years ago, I wouldn't have walked into a motorsport environment and just started to chat to people. Well, I would do that now. The other thing perhaps is to find someone who will sponsor you. I'm not going to go into it now, but I found one of my team. I found completely by accident through my local branch in North Wales, and it's been one of the most positive things that's happened to me and my team in the past few years. If she hadn't had the confidence to come up to talk to me, to other guys from the North Wales branch, one, I wouldn't have met her, and two, I wouldn't have found an excuse to employ her. If there's one thing I could say, how do you break down these barriers? How do you move in? Perhaps a confession here. I do love motorsport, but I think I love music more. And if you ask me, do I love my job? Absolutely, I love my job. But I also, I remember the days doing, difficult long rock tours, building stages, taking them down, dragging them to another city, doing it all over again. I absolutely love that. It's just I've got too old. That's a very, very tough gig. But one of the guys I used to work for said, at some point you'll become a rug. And I thought, what's a rug? And a couple of years down the line, I found out that what he was referring to was somebody who was a really useful guy, a really useful girl, and that's what I aspire to be. So I've made myself useful. I've made sure that if I've engaged in a conversation around potentially opening a door into a new career, I've made sure I've got the background knowledge. I've looked for who I can talk to. I've gone on LinkedIn. I've looked through colleagues in IOSH. You and I, we met just through, you asked me where I was one day, and it turns out that I was like 10-15 minutes away from you, and that's how our friendship and professional relationship has grown. There's no easy answer, but I don't believe there's a definitive route. I genuinely love being a jack of all trades. I like being a nomad. I try to be a decent guy, and I believe that's probably how I managed to transition into working in motorsport full time in two of my passions, health and safety and motorsport.
And I think that's for me. There's a real question as to ask as a why. Why do you want to be in that environment? And I think if you can answer that truly, that you think there's something you can bring to the performance of the team or to the way an event is put on, or to the organisation of managing somewhere like Silverstone or Brands Hatch, etc., then I think you've got a real good answer to go into it. I think if you're looking at it because it looks all exciting and glamorous on the telly, it's not quite that in the reality. Of course, there are some elements of that are exciting and enjoyable, but the day to day is traditional safety work at the end of the day, with some, you know, either interesting toys or some quite exciting technology. Would you just give us a bit of an intro into this, what I'm told is a very sexy Formula E video that we're going to see, and then I'll throw it over to Andy to come back in after the video and ask us a load of questions.
Actually, we're not going to do that, because how can I hold a candle to you when you represent Formula One, and the winningest, one of the winningest team now. I think what we'll do, Ben, if you can queue up the Paris time lapse video, I think that will probably elicit a few more questions from people out there listening in. And it also gives me a chance to explain why I think you and I are slightly different, or our roles are slightly different, even if our common goals are the same.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
Now, Stuart, I'm going to put you on the spot. What might be unusual about that little time-lapse video from a potential, if you were looking at it from a normal construction safety perspective? What are we doing that's a bit different?
Well, I think the first thing is you're trying to put on a live event in the middle of the city whilst the city continues. You can't close down Paris just to run your event. So that's kind of my first observation. Absolutely.
Now, it might be that I'm a bit of an odd character. We have 2 or 3 really challenging races. Paris is one of them because of where the race takes place. Rome is another one. New York is challenging. London's quite complex as well. But Paris is without doubt the most difficult. Our crew, you're only seeing a very small part of our track there. Our ecosystem is probably peaks at about 4,000 in Paris. That's a hell of a lot of people to not necessarily to be responsible for, but to support and ensure that they're working within what we now refer to as the Formula E minimum health and safety standards. What most people don't necessarily pick up from that video, which you did, is that Paris doesn't stop, and until the day before the race, the highway is open. We need to find a safe system of work to allow our suppliers and our subcontractors to build the track and all of the infrastructure while the highway is alive. We get great support from the city, but it's a really complex race. It's so complex that I absolutely love it. I find any excuse I can not to go, not to go out in the evenings. I find multiple excuses to go back and just watch what's happening. That's where I get my buzz. The other thing I find as well is if I tend to pop back when people presume it's kind of after hoursy, it's amazing what you get to see. And my approach to non-compliance. And I'm not going to stand there with with my hard hat on, a high vis and my safety shoes, and and tear somebody a new one. I'm going to have a chat to them. I'm going to understand why they thought it was appropriate to behave that way. I'll probably draw their manager in, and if I'm really concerned, I'll probably bring their project lead in for that particular supplier. I think there's great value in just those simple chats, those safety chats, ensuring that you've got a good two-way flow of communication. But yeah, that's my buzz. it is just that delivering that infrastructure. I do love the racing, and our racing is getting better. You know, you could actually say that, you know, quite honestly, our cars overtake more in one lap than Formula One cars probably do in a race, because our cars do look, on a bad day, they do look like a bad day in Oulton Park at a, you know, a club Formula Ford race. But that adds to the, you know, that adds to the excitement. Yeah, I'm glad you picked that up from that little video. I did drop you in there. I didn't cue that up for you at all, and that perhaps also, you know, reinforces my comment from earlier. Where do I get, you know, the real pleasure from my safety career currently? And it is that, you know, that planning process. It doesn't just happen automatically. I need to go and meet with the city officials. I need to actually reassure the city of Paris, where we are. We sit across to the boundaries of two mairies, so there's two mayors to satisfy. Plus, you know, the last when that video was filmed, we had Gilets jaunes happening as well. Interestingly, they left us alone, which is, you know, I didn't predict that. I thought we'd have some issues. It does.
You're never certain, are you, what you're gonna get when you go to these places? And I, you know, because you are putting on an event in a city, and the city carries on around you, you are subject to the whims and changes of that city. And I think that, you know, it's some of those unknown things that you can't, you can kind of have a plan for, but you still don't really know exactly what's going to happen until you're there and the build is underway, and ultimately the race day happens. We've chatted for long enough, I think, and I think Andy's probably itching to fire some difficult questions, hopefully at you, and then some kind of ones to me. Andy, are you able to come back and join us and run the QA for us, please?
Thank you very much there, guys. And like you say, very interesting. You could probably talk about this all night between yourselves. And like the Q&A, as you said, is completely lit up. I'm going to rattle through as many as I can. So if we try and keep the answers kind of short, we'll try and get through as many as we can here. I've got the first question here from Lawrence Bamber. He's asking what the highest risk in F1 and FE is. Is it the same or is it different? I think we've seen a big difference there just with the time-lapse video, but yeah, over to you guys.
I think it's different from our approaches. I think the biggest risk in my world isn't particularly too much different from maybe a construction site. You know, we put up motorhomes, we travel logistically, a heck of a lot of equipment all around the world. So there's the big risks associated with that. And then I think some of the other risks in our world are some of the testing processes that we do. You know, we've got a Formula One engine on a dyno. You know, if it goes wrong, it can spectacularly go wrong, and it will happily set itself on fire. So I think all of the kind of standard big risks that you'd expect in the safety world, from, you know, heavy lifting equipment through to fire, and I think Rick's video's given you a good example of his risk profile, but I'll let him talk. Yeah,
I think that there's two phases to my world. There's the construction safety element. The logistics of what we actually do is quite stunning. You know, we're talking 500 plus trucks. All of those trucks need to be buffered. They need to be brought in to a schedule, and currently, you know, there's not just COVID to consider. Some of the countries that both Formula E and Formula One race in have other inherent risks which keep our security managers on their toes. In essence, if I were to share with you my season 6, that was last year, statistical analysis of risk, it would start with number 1, working at height. Number 2, effective separation of human beings from plant and machinery. And also bear in mind, when I'm talking about human beings, I'm not just talking about staff, suppliers and contractors. Paris is a perfect example. We need to keep the public away from what we're doing as well. I would say that there is a significant risk that overlaps our construction phase element and our sporting element, and that's the amount of power we use. You know, our cars have changed significantly over the past 7-8 years. When I joined Formula E, you know, the amount of power that we were drawing from either the grid or some of the dirty generators that we used at that time, currently, you know, fortunately we don't use those anymore, has risen exponentially. You know, we currently draw over 1 megawatt during the charging phase. Now, if you get, you know, trying to separate all of our human beings away from our power installation, which looks like the power installation that you'd have in a small village, also proves a challenge. So I guess the bit where I lean into your world, Stuart, is, you know, when the cars are not actually during, you know, out either in qualifying or racing, there's a big piece of work that I need to keep an oversight on around what happens in the pits, and you know, it's not just about risk. Also, you know, we're very, as you alluded to earlier on, we're very, very proud of our sustainability record. You know, carbon neutral for the whole of the life of the business. It's just also ensuring that there's not just health and safety compliance, there's also compliance with our environmental safety standards and our sustainability standards. And we really are quite tough on that. And you, I believe, are about to find out quite how tough we are around environmental and sustainability standards when, and now it's no longer a secret, when the Formula E cars move back and into your factory and fall under your remit. That's the only bit that there is any kind of crossover. There is no comparison within the cars. A Formula E car could only compete with a Formula One car off the mark, probably up to 100 kilometers an hour. At that point, there is no comparison in the cars, and we actually don't want there to be a comparison between the cars. Our cars are much more aligned with a world endurance car, and with a car that you potentially could go buy on a Monday. That's kind of the difference in the ethos of the two series. But something which you and I haven't alluded to, ultimately Formula One and Formula E have the same parent company, which is Liberty Media, which does also beg the question, which, you know, is often asked, at what point will Formula E and Formula One, you know, converge? And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but, you know, it's really clear with the government statement this week that they will, you know, that we'll cease to be able to purchase a fossil-fueled car after 2030. I think the, you know, the writing is on the wall for perhaps 10 years' time from now.
Thank you very much. I think just touching on that, Rick, and this is a question more directed, I suppose, at Stuart. You spoke earlier about your environmental background, Stuart. How does this fit into the Formula One team, who presumably have a large carbon footprint?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that, you know, the world of Formula One has a large carbon footprint. I think it's also fair to say that we recognise that, and we're doing our utmost to, you know, fulfil the sustainability agenda and to reduce that as much as possible. I think when you think about the amount of technology that's come from Formula One down through into, you know, the Mercedes road cars and the reduction in emissions because of the, you know, technological developments we've put into, you know, the research, design, and ultimately delivered on the track, you can see that kind of having a positive impact for the planet. I think it's, you know, it's very hard to, you know, kind of sit here and have hyper green credentials in that sport, but I think we're all working towards Formula One being sustainable, because we recognise if it's not, we're not going to be around for long enough, and you know, we want to keep racing for as long as possible. So I hope that answers it. And I think, you know, the other element is that, you know, environment often falls within health and safety, and we look to do as much as we can, you know, from a sustainability agenda across, you know, HQ and the work that we do in the UK as well.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. During the discussion, you both alluded to your interest in the fire safety aspect. There's a question here from Stuart Sturton. He's interested to hear more about the firefighting issues associated with the battery packs or damage and fire post-incident events. Presumably different hazards, different to the hydrocarbon fuels.
Absolutely. Now, That is quite a simple question, but it would probably take 20 minutes to answer. Yeah, our risks are very, very different. A 250 kilowatt battery, individual cells within a cell pack. If you were looking, let's do the easy bit first. If you were looking at from a sporting perspective, what concerns me, what concerns the FIA, and a project we've worked on recently is if the cell was subjected to significant trauma, there is the potential for the battery to go into thermal runaway. I'm saying thermal runaway very clearly as opposed to fire. Currently, in our 7 years, we've never had a car battery go into thermal runaway. We're able to monitor that very, very carefully. The engineers can monitor individual cells within the cell pack, so we know the performance of the cell. We know what's happening. If we were to go to I think the really insightful part of that question is, what happens, when the cameras are off? That's the bit that really can, that does keep me busy. Transporting of the batteries, there's a very, very complex protocol under the dangerous goods regulations to allow us to fly the batteries. It's really critical how much charge we keep in the batteries to ensure that they don't get hot while they're flying. We have developed over the past 5 years several solutions to fighting to potentially fighting a fire in one of our batteries within the car. I'd like to say that it's really, really technical. Sadly, the solution is currently, unless there is actually a rupture in an individual cell or within the cell pack, the firefighting mediums that we use don't work. We use a product called Lithex. If the Lithex product can actually get inside of the cell, it will extinguish a fire. There are several other alternatives used by fire services around the world. I kind of lean towards, which is the protocol that we've currently adopted. Put a car that we believe is in thermal runaway, put it into a quarantined area, and then we'll cool the car and the battery until the engineers are satisfied that there is no chance of thermal runaway, or that the battery has the individual cell has cooled. We have had fires in the cars, but not actually in the lithium-ion main power pack. We've had fires in the backup battery, which the cars use in the early days used for changing gear. We don't change gears anymore, and for data acquisition and backup. There is, to conclude this, a solution which I passionately do not like, but sometimes the local, the city fire authorities or national fire authorities will take this out of our hands. I'll give you the example of Switzerland. Their modus, if you like, for putting out a fire in an electric powered car, a battery powered car, is to pick the car up physically, put it into a container and flood the container. That to me is so incredibly risky. It could cause an exothermic reaction, could cause a significant release of some particularly unpleasant some gases, which would it just creates an additional risk, which I would find very difficult to mitigate. I think the answer to the question is we're learning, but we're getting better season on season.
Thank you, Rick. I've got another question here from Faye Rockley. Faye works in the media side of health and safety, and she's wondering how you both deal with the different media types on big motorsport events where you see broadcasters from around the world entering pit lanes, and especially into garages as well. How is that effectively managed?
Well, I'll be quite honest with you. There's something that's now known as the Netflix curse, and Netflix turn up and spend their time with one of the F1 teams producing what I've got to say is a very good program. But hand on heart, what tends to happen is they turn up and it's an added distraction, and what you tend to find is the race weekend doesn't go as well as you'd anticipated, and Ferrari had a dose of that. We had a dose of that in Germany quite badly, and it is a challenge. I think this year, because of COVID, you've seen a real reduction in that interaction from the media. There's less media present, and actually speaking to the men and women that work in our team, they've really enjoyed having less of that around. The benefit that you do have in the Formula One paddock is the majority of the media are very experienced, and they understand the intricacies of what they're working in, and 9 times out of 10 keep out of harm's way. But you will quite often see one of our team shooing a cameraman out of the way of a car exiting the pits. So it is a challenge, but there are quite clear kind of guidelines for the media to follow when they're in that environment, and it's a bit of a reliance on their experience and the knowledge that we have from people in our work environment to help them stay as safe as possible.
I think I could jump in on that point. Stuart's media is also my media. That's why we don't race on the same weekends. One of the advantages that we have, because we're a much smaller championship, in order to reduce costs, which is also part of our sustainability message, we only allow, in fact, we operate with less than a quarter of the staff that a Formula One team would have, which makes it really quite easy for our security team to spot any interloper. The other thing that I've been able to do, because I've been with Formula E, from the very early days, if you're media and you apply for a pass, as part of your pass application process, you do the site safety induction. So that's something that, because we're a smaller team, I've been able to integrate some health and safety process into areas that, possibly some other championships are not are not able to do, because they're so much bigger than us.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question here from Paul. This is around the use of the Halo system. There was negative views around the Halo system when it was first brought in. How do you convince the naysayers around it and the introduction and its benefits?
I think we didn't really have to. Is the honest answer. The direction had to come. You have an incident like that, and you can't not react to it. And I think it's demonstrated its worth in a few events that we've seen at different races. As with any change, there's a bit of resistance to it to start with, but fundamentally, I think they've designed it in really well now, and you kind of almost forget they weren't part of it. We did see qualifying on Saturday, the start of Q2 with a truck still on the side of the track, and that was quite a disappointing thing to see. And I'm hoping that is under review by the FIA, because we can't have a repeat of an incident like that in difficult conditions. And from my viewpoint, I'm happy it's in place. There's some challenges around getting people in and out of the cockpit not quite so easy, but I think fundamentally it's there to protect the lives of our drivers, and I'm all for that.
Fully agree with you there, Stuart. Part of my remit is to manage the track fire and rescue teams. One of the challenges that we had with the Halo, Stuart's absolutely correct. Extrication is now significantly more complicated, but one of the issues that we recognized very early on when we were given some Halos to cut up, if a car is subjected to a high G-force deceleration, and the chassis, the monocoque, is twisted or deformed in any way, that energy is still there. And one of the things that we've discovered is that if our extrication teams use normal extrication techniques, using the normal cutting equipment and rescue gear that you'd see firefighters using, on the highway, the techniques don't work. It is really not a good idea to cut through a Halo after that car's been subject to a high G deceleration. And we found different solutions. And in fact, our guys are all really, really talented people. They're using the same kit, but they're using it in a different way. And it's been trial and error. I've kind of kept an overview. I'm sure Stuart does when they do. I know the teams will do extrication training themselves back at the factories. But the positive that I've seen out of this, other than the great benefit from the halo, I've actually seen how our fire and rescue guys have taken on the challenge of the extrication and come up with different solutions and presented those solutions to me. And then actually, I really haven't had a great deal to do, and that to me is is kind of a success.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a question directed at Stuart. Mercedes looks to be very disciplined from an armchair perspective on race weekends. Does this flow throughout your organisation?
The really short answer to that is 100% it does. Yeah, there's, there is, I think you kind of go back to our core values. People have a passion for what they do. They have a high degree of determination, excellence in everything we apply it to, innovation, and you kind of think of all of those things mixed together, and that is the standards that are expected. Everybody in this organisation, no matter where you work, is challenged to bring performance to the car. Safety is no different. How does safety bring its tenth of a second to the car? And the key focus on that is ensuring that our people can focus on the jobs they're here to do and aren't worrying about the risks associated with the activities, because we've effectively either controlled those or brought them into a state where we've got the right containment in place. So I think it's really nice to hear that discipline comes through. When you're sat watching it from behind the scenes, there are the other occasions where in the heat of battle, whatever needs to be done will get done. But I think the discipline and rigour to how we approach not just the race weekend, but an entire season and the design of the car goes through every element of the organisation.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. I'm just very conscious of the time now. I'm just going to wrap up with one more question, if that's okay. And this one's going to be directed at Rick. This is from Malcolm Smith. He said it was interesting to hear of your rallying backgrounds. I have a huge love of rallying as a spectator, as part of a competing team, and most recently a Motorsport UK Marshal. I've seen some very encouraging improvements in safety over the years. Scottish rallying has had its fair share of tragedy. Do you feel you've been able to bring your previous experience as a competitor to your present role?
I'd say as a club level competitor, but as an international official in rallying, I think there are as many comparisons between rallying and Formula E as there is between Formula One and Formula E. When I joined Formula E, I didn't know how to approach it, so I brought my experience from rallying. Yeah, Scottish Motorsport's had a tough time. There's a much bigger picture, and that question, we could discuss that question for 30 minutes, but the absolute answer is yes. I've learned a lot about crowd management from rallying. I remember, it must be now 15 years ago, when we first started to introduce crowd management and crowd flow in some of the Welsh forests. I remember when we first did this in Sweetlam. Yeah, there was a huge amount of resistance. Now, I think rallying fans, I think, motorsport fans are motorsport fans. I think rallying pushes the envelope around, public safety, perhaps, much more so than Formula One and Formula E. But the simple answer to that question is, if I hadn't got that knowledge of safety management within within the complex rally environment, I don't think I'd have built the skill set that I have currently, and I probably wouldn't be as competent at my job in Formula E if I didn't have that knowledge.
Well, what can I say? Thank you very much, gentlemen. We've managed to answer 8 questions. We've got a further 21 sat there in the chat box, and there's certainly not going to be enough time to get around to answering all of these. Absolutely fascinating discussion. Rick, Stuart, we could probably talk about Formula One, Formula E, Motorsport for a long time, and maybe there's a part 2 session that we could maybe look at doing again in the future. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. So from my perspective, and on behalf of everybody that's joined us, we've had over 100 participants join us this evening. But like I say, the questions are coming in thick and fast. On behalf of the IOSH North East of Scotland, I'd just like to say a huge thank you for coming along and joining us. And I'm going to hand over to Ray now, who I'm sure is going to echo my thoughts. Thank you.
100%. Yes, a huge thank you. I think that's, I want to say it's gone better than we thought. And that's a lie, because we knew that this would be a fantastic session. There's definitely a lot of interest. And I think it highlights that we should have definitely done this sooner. Part 2, Andy's stolen the words. I think we do need a part 2 at some point in New Year, because there's a lot more. And what I would ask, and I know because the members have got so many questions, is if Ben is collecting the questions from the Q&A sessions, we can compile them, send them out on an email, and maybe get some answers from you, so we could share that with members as well, because it would be just great to get your views and help them understand a little bit more. And a lot of them are relating to how they can get into the industry and what they've done, and you know, routes into it. And I know, given everything else that's going on in the world, the breaking down of silos and going from one industry to another is really important.
And I think from our side, well, I'll say from my side, I think the questions are cracking. I've had an eye on them as they've come through. I'm more than happy to try and answer as many as we can via the email. I'd just like to say thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure to talk to IOSH members, and you know, I'm proud to be part of IOSH. So I think, you know, the more things we can do like this that encourage people to, you know, connect and ask people questions and try and find their way in the world of occupational safety and health, the better. So thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Now I'll leave Rick to say some final words.
I mean, what more can I say than what you've just said, Stuart? You know, you and I are equally passionate about IOSH. I genuinely believe that you know, part of my being where I am now is the support I've gained from IOSH and the vastly more experienced people there are out there, you know, in the industry that have shared their time with me. I think the reason why I've enjoyed this so much, and you can all probably see I'm kind of laid back in my chair. I think what you guys have just done is you've just listened to two friends who work in the same industry, having a chat. And for me, it's been absolutely brilliant. I've been looking forward to this, and I hope that there's another chance for us to have a part 2. I'd just like to conclude, though, Stuart, that now you need to pay the North Wales branch back. You owe us now, so we've got that one in the bag.
Well, Rick, before Andy says anything, because it would be wrong of me not to, IOSH London Met would happily love to do a joint one with Wales, because we are collaborative and we love the UK. We've used Scotland, so why not Wales now? Yeah, absolutely.
Why not all three?
Absolutely.
We just need Ireland as well now. So I see we've got Kieran Delaney online as well, so maybe Kieran could sort something out from the Ireland side of things as well.
The joint UK-wide session. We'll get it in the diaries. But thank you all. I can see members are starting to, you know, they've all enjoyed this. We will get a part 2 in, because I think it's quite obvious that we need it, and we'll be sharing the questions with you. So once again, from all the branches, thank you so much, and have a fantastic evening.
Thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated.
Pleasure, guys.
Thank you.
Virtual round of applause for you both.